From Linda Creighton's book, The Future of Work is Already Here. I remember taking my young son Dominic to Tanzania to spend time with the Maasai in the Masai Mara. Dominic and I were standing on the top of a hill looking over the empty plains below, talking with a young Maasai warrior about his life. As we talked, we were interrupted by a sound very familiar to Dominic and me, the sound of a mobile phone ringing. From his pouch, the warrior extracted his phone and talked in the excited way people across the world talk on their mobile phones. When he finished the conversation, I asked him who he was talking to. My brother, was his reply. He had taken the goats out to find pasture this morning, and he has just rung me to tell me that after 3 hours walking into the scrub, they had found fresh grass for the goats to eat. Welcome to the Berlin Change Days 2012, and welcome to my keynote on the new ecosystems of organizations.
So I want to talk about a couple of things. The first one, the matrix is alive. I want to talk about complexity, and not from a theoretical viewpoint. We all talk about complexity for 20 years. And there have been fantastic books about what that means for our world. For example, the wonderful book of Margaret Wheatley, Leadership and the New Science, which probably a couple of you have read. And we all use the word complexity so often. We're talking about something which I find quite a revolutionary thought, which is that access is more important than ownership. It means that organization can less and less afford to keep assets, because the assets change so quickly that they constantly would have to reinvest, including human assets, by the way. We talk about, those of you who know me, that I'm very much into new ways of working, and not as a catchword or so. This is something very real going on. Those of you who are working in organizations probably know that new ways of working is one of the current hottest slogans which organizations are looking for. We're talking about virtuality, we're talking about flexible time, flexible space, and things like that. Something I keep saying also for a couple of years, and I think I want to stress that again. I think we have been working on, some of us, including myself, I plead guilty, some of us have been working on the notion that people resist change. I think that's bullshit. We don't resist change. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And finally, change management has become a commodity. It's not us alone who are doing change management. Everybody's doing change management in organizations. And I want to end with a couple of questions. I really just want to give you questions today, because I hope we have at least a couple of answers. I'm not quite sure, but maybe we have some answers over the next 2 days. Okay. Matrix is alive. And I might bore you with some things for you who are working in organizations, but I really want to realize for us where organizations stand now. Let's make it a little bit simple for the beginning, and let's start with the viewpoint of an individual, let's say manager, upper middle manager, who is in any kind of large global organization. And by the way, when I talk about large organizations, most of the things I'm talking to apply to smaller organizations, to non-profit organizations equally. Not everything, but a lot of things. So let's look at him. Let's call him Kevin. Kevin is a middle manager in a global company. And he is in a network of relationships. And I wanted to simplify it a little bit. I mean, just a little bit. I couldn't really build up the whole complexity, but Kevin, and I'll give you an example in a moment. Kevin is probably a member of a functional group. He might even have his line manager in the functional group. He might serve business partners in the company. If it's a global company, he's part of a regional group. And maybe there are some key accounts, some big customers, and he's also related to the key accounts group in his organization. And he has to report to all of these four. But that's not where his reporting duties end. There's a lot of procurement regulations, which takes him months to get any piece of equipment in. There's health and environment and safety regulations, which make sure that what the company does doesn't do any harm to the employees, but also to the outside world. There's corporate social responsibility. There's a controlling, of course, which asks him to cut down costs wherever possible, including pushing the consulting fees down, the external consultants. There's HR, of course, with HR regulation. Quite interesting, in many big organizations, most staff don't belong to the company anymore. They are contractors. And he relates to the contractors, but he can't really manage their performance because they are outside workers. Up to 70% in some industries. I work in the oil industry, and I come to the oil industry in a moment. 70% of the workers are contractors. There are governments to deal with, there are other partners, strategic business partners, other companies work together, NGOs, of course, social media, traditional media, somewhere also the end consumers, which could be in the company, or external consumers, and of course the shareholders. That's enough for the moment. I think enough complexity. And of course there's his team. But let's forget his team a little bit, because that's becoming too complex then. This complexity, of course, gets even bigger if you put some layers on it. Put down the layers of the values of the company, which need to be in the mind of every manager, at least theoretically. Think about strategies. Strategies, where does the company develop to? What do we owe to our shareholders? Things like that. Think about the distance, and I come much more to distance in the third part. Most teams don't sit together in an office anymore. The boss might be in Mumbai, and another one might be in Boston, and another one might be in Munich. So the distance of teams, and I'll talk more about that later, is an additional complexity. And then, of course, think about speed. Speed of reaction to necessities, to business necessities. Is that complex? I think it is. And I'm always impressed that organizations do get things done in this incredible complexity in which they are. And make no mistake, this complexity, as I said, refers, of course, not only to profit organization, it refers to all things we're dealing with. May it be poverty, environmental pollution, political war, political violence, things like getting a functioning national health system. Yes, and we are Europeans. It refers to Europeans as well. So my question is, come back to that later, do we really have the tools, not only the philosophy and the approach, but do we really have the tools to help clients to deal with the complexity? Second part, access is more important than ownership. And this is probably something which will have a huge impact on how organizations are formed. I wonder who of you has bought a CD in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years? I haven't, unless I want to give one as a present. I borrow music from the internet. Shared cars, car sharing, popular in Germany for like 15 or 20 years. Now a big thing also in the US, shared car. I don't own a car for more than 15 years. Why should I own a car? It's fixed asset. It costs me a lot of money. I'm not talking about the petrol costs. But this refers to companies as well. Why should a company keep computers, IT systems, servers, if they can rent it and rent the service and have that much more convenient? And this means, of course, what happens to the IT departments in the future. the people who run the IT departments. No wonder that the IT departments, and I hope I don't step on somebody's toes, no wonder that the IT departments are the most conservative departments in organizations, more conservative than controlling. It's quite fascinating. In the last years, I'm very often working in organizations with a very strict IT policy. And then the people who work in the organizations have a much better technology at home than at work. Isn't that hilarious? So when they work, for example, in some organizations, Skype is not allowed. So when they want to Skype with somebody in their job, they go home or they bring in their laptop and do it secretly or something like that. That would change a lot. Why does a company need an R&D department? If there is access to millions of bright minds there, and Innocentive, for those of you who don't know, is a platform which has been out there now for 8 years or so, which connects companies, solution seekers with solution providers. They give awards, they ask, let's have a solution for something. I don't have an example here now. For a new biomarker or whatsoever, and ask people for providing their solutions. Excellent. Let's come to the third point. And as I said at the beginning, the third point is the thing I'm really passionate about in the moment. And in my first draft version of this presentation, I called it Virtuality is the Norm. But it goes beyond that. Virtuality, the norm is just a part, it's just something which leads to new ways of working. Good. So the first thing is, virtuality is the norm. In many organizations, in more organizations, in those organizations which probably didn't think about that a couple of years ago, with cutting costs and with enabling technology, the fact that teams are split over space, over geographical locations, becomes the normal way of working. But, and this is my thesis, my hypothesis, my observation, we haven't really moved into that yet. We have the technology, we know how to Skype and so on, but in many, I see some heads shaking. In many organizations, people haven't really moved into it in the sense of that they understand what are the processes behind these new ways of working. And it goes beyond. So this will be a normal picture nowadays, which also is a reference to us. If we want to do workshops with our clients, do we all bring them from, I don't know where, Mumbai and Boston and Munich together and so on? Or do we wait until they meet anyhow, the team, and then slip in? Well, could be. Let's shortly reflect how that all developed, because the idea of the weird idea, or the idea which was good for a while to put people into an office is not so old. It's like 150, 160, 170 years old. Started in the middle of the 19th century, partly a little bit earlier. There were some early insurance companies and banks, but it was basically in the middle of the 19th century that people were pressed together in offices. Couple of reasons for that. One reason was the transaction cost of information. If we think of organizations like insurances and large export companies in England in the 19th century, they had to process a lot of information. They had to transport the information from one person to another in a very short time. And the best thing was, of course, to have the people together in offices. Of course, we all know that there was one more reason, more than one more reason, but one more reason was, of course, control. one question I usually do ask the leaders I train is, do you want commitment or compliance? And what most people get in organizations, we know that by surveys of millions and millions of people, is that what you get usually at most is compliance. There were other reasons for the offices. In the middle of the 19th century, the real estate prices went up, so it was a need to build these high-rise buildings. And then the elevator was invented. The safe elevator was invented in the middle of the 90s by a guy called Otis. But what have we done to us? What a waste of resources now, having people spending hours and hours in traffic jams, spending the money for real estate, which of course has another reason. Of course it's also a symbol for the power of the corporation. But what an incredible waste of resources. And those of you who have in mind, well, virtual work, and I'll come to that, is something where we lose social ties and social contact. Well taken. But this is the trade-off. So, can we think about how to make work more human? Less controlled? And avoid these things. And how do we want to attract those people? With control, fixed working hours, with working styles which are deep-rooted in the 19th century? I'm not sure whether this is really what we want. So, that's the norm. That's the norm nowadays. And the funny thing about this is, as a manager, you have difficulties to control what this guy or this lady is doing, whether they are really working. I mean, you can, of course, implement sophisticated systems of time tracking when is he at his computer. So you could micromanage and look, what exactly is he doing at what time? But actually, you can't control it. And you can't not force people to work, to engage in virtual work. They need to do it voluntarily. There are 4 different things we have to think about in our work. There is work which is location dependent, or time dependent, or location independent, or time independent. So let's start at the right bottom. Location dependent and time dependent is obviously major parts of the health service, although parts of it might not be location dependent in the future anymore. If you can have, for example, and there was an example in one of the books here, a doctor virtually leading a team of surgeons through the internet. So even that has changed. Part of production, of course, the classical hardware production is maybe at least location dependent because you need a lot of input in machinery, and partly time dependent. Part of retail seems like, but there are new models of how employees can organize themselves and at least define the time in which they work and not being told. There is the location dependent and the time independent. Some parts of research, for example, where also it depends on machinery, certain expensive instruments and so on, but you don't necessarily need to be there at a certain time. You can do your research partly during the night. Part of production, of course, yeah. Then there is the location independent and time dependent. So that's parts of customer care, but not all. I mean, of course, in certain areas where people call in during the day, but this is becoming more and more time independent also, if you stretch that. And of course, there is location independent and time independent, which is an increasing number, an ever increasing number of jobs in all kinds of non-physical production, in larger parts of the service industry, and of course in management. And I don't want you to have pity with these poor well-paid managers, but the irony is that those people who in the moment benefit least from time and location flexibility as are managers, because they have this stigma. They have to stay 60, 70 hours in the office every week. There is, for example, Unilever, which in 2009 implemented a strategy specifying that all employees may work at any time and anywhere as long as business needs are met. That travel should be avoided wherever possible, and that managers are assessed annually on how well they support agile workers worldwide. So, in order to implement these new ways of working, there are 5 principles to observe and 5 principles for us to work on with our clients. And the hottest commodity in new ways of working, the hottest commodity in companies in the moment is trust. Because these companies we talked about before, these companies in complexity, these companies with coming new generations in, they can only work through trust. Control doesn't work anymore. Think of this, I don't want to flip back, but think of this incredible complexity in the company before. So trust needs to be built. And managers have just started to understand that, which is a total contradiction to what they've learned on their management schools. It just starts. Something we also know for a long time, but now it's serious, is rewarding output, not input anymore. So establishing systems of looking at how can we see what the product of the person is, and not the time she puts in. Understanding the business case. It's not equal in 2 organizations. I'll come back to that later on when I talk about us as consultants. So understanding really the business case is very important. What's this company about, and how does it make money, how does it operate, what are the products, what are the strategies and things like that. Start at the top. Sure, have the managers walk the talk. That's probably the most difficult, because if I say people don't resist to change, sometimes I believe there are 2 groups of people who resist to change. That are change management consultants and managers. And treat people as individuals, because everybody has different needs for this kind of new ways of working. Some people might be happy at working from home or from else. Other people need to have the place of work in the office. Part 4 is people don't resist change, and I'm happy to discuss that. But I think it's important to discuss it, or at least reflect on it, because it has been one of the foundations of our work for a long time. And I remember a story, a couple of us, now they're not here now, worked with Europol a couple of years ago. And Europol at that time wanted to implement a new data system for analysis of data about crime, about cross-country crime, drug-related crime and all these things. And they said, oh, people don't use that new system. Can you help us? Can you do some change management workshops? You know that? Rings a bell? Can you do some change management workshops? Yeah, we said, yeah, sure, we can. To us. So we said, okay, we need to talk to people and bring us 2 groups of people. Bring us a group of people who are positive about the new system, and bring us a group of people who hesitate. And don't tell them that you compose the groups on that basis. And we had interviews, and what we found out was that was not about the system. It was about their role and their understanding themselves, because they were analysts, they were doing the work, they were analyzing the data, and they feel, although they were a big group in Europol, they felt really a bit like outlawed, not respected. And we found out it was about re-establishing the pride in their craft. So what we did was a series of workshops mainly based on appreciative inquiry, then putting things together, having people working on pilot and prototypes and things like that. And then at the end of the process, which took a couple of months, the tool was not an issue anymore, because the tool was just a tool for them to do their work. For me, the most important sentence in my leadership trainings over the last year, so all people have purposes, concerns, and circumstances. Purposes is what they really care for, what they burn for, where they get up in the morning, what they like to do. Concerns is what they're worried about, and circumstances is what what defines their possibilities in their work. And all what we experience as resistance is, of course, not recognizing that people have purposes and concerns and circumstances. And I think that we have to work on. I think the sentence, people are resisted change, has basically been an excuse for bad leadership. I think that's the only thing. So I think we don't need to work so much on the people, but we need to work on the leaders. And we need to help people to train their muscles in the sense of if they learn new skills, new habits, and so on. Because the body takes much longer than the brain to adapt new skills. Much longer. Last part, change management has become a commodity. I think change management has been around in organizational development for 20, 30 years, and everybody has had their experience with it, and a lot of people are doing it now, not only the people who started as change management specialists, which were very often from the psychological field, educational field, things like that. I recommend you to revisit where we come from. In 2008, I shot a video in Ohio at the Nexus for Change, where 80 people from the different disciplines, open space, appreciative inquiry, what have you, came together and explored the field. How did it develop? And we did a wonderful timeline. And the whole video is on YouTube. It's called History of Change. And if you don't find the link, let me know. But it's on my account. And of course, I don't play the whole video because it's 22 minutes. Just the first 1.5 minutes, which is about the early beginnings in the 60s and in the 70s. And we hear Barbara Bunker at the beginning, who is, of course, one of the great persons of that time. Sorry.
I'm Barbara Bunker. I'm a group of one. I was trained in the early 60s. I went back to graduate school in my 30s, and I went to Columbia Teachers College, where Morton Deutsch and Matt Miles were working. And Matt Miles, who's a name that you don't probably know, did the first systems intervention in schools. And I was one of many research assistants. We watched interventions and we documented, basically.
So we're going to all these, and many of us were going to these NTL trainings at this point. We were graduate students, we were young internal folks, we were, our big interventions were flip chart. We also could do one thing maybe, which was team building. Sometimes we could do survey development, but that was sort of, touch and go.
So that was the start, and of course we've come a long way, and if you watch the video, because you hear all the stories of how all the other things were developed over the years. And I'm not saying we should throw them away. I think it's just time to reflect on, if we look at the reality of organizations, which I've been talking for the last 45 minutes or so, whether this still is enough, whether we still have the tools. There's some new words, and I'm not saying that we should just have new words, we should also have new concepts. These are the words I hear in organizations. There are some hard words like accountability. I think for me accountability actually is a word I start to like more and more, because this is something, of course, which we need in new ways of working. Of course, compared with trust, accountability and trust and engagement are things which go together. I also hear delivery, performance, excellence, resilience, consistency, but I also hear agility, I hear trust, I hear purpose, I hear collaboration, and a couple of other words, alignment, leadership. So these are the things our clients want from us, want from me. So I think we need to dive deeper into organizations and understand organizations better. We talked about the business case before. So really get into the organizations and work deep in them. It's not enough anymore just to come from outside and do some interventions. And I know many of you are doing that already. We definitely have to think about our toolbox. And what about our own agility? And certainly we have to become digital, virtual. If we want to work with the new organizations, we decide we don't want to work with the new organization, but we have to become virtual, certainly. So, what about you? I'll leave you with a wonderful quote from who I think is the most gifted and most passionate business writer nowadays. Is Holger, who writes for Harvard Business Review and blogs. And I'll read it to you because it's so beautiful. Meaning then is something like a responsibility, not merely a need. It resides and resounds, like the human experience between us. It transcends the narrow confines of the self and connects us through the power of grace and purpose to the human world around us. It's the act of investing in what we profess to care about and caring about what we profess to love. And not merely expressing our values, but valuing that which is worthwhile in lasting human terms. And so arcing the trajectory of not just our own tiny lives, but those of the people around us towards the just glimpsed sunrise of memory. Let's create meaning together over the next 2.5 days. Thank you.